And I have with us, we have two colleagues from the Missouri State Legislature. It's an honor to not only represent you in the halls of government, but it's also incredible to work with great statesmen such as these. I'll give a quick, I guess a very quick bio both of these gentlemen. The gentleman in the bow tie is Representative Chris Kelly. He represents the Boone County, Columbia area. And I don't know what I'm bourbon about for some reason. But anyway, a fantastic man serving his last term in the State House. Very well respected. Him and his wife, Nanette. Also they served not only as he served, they've also served as judges, and they also have a great love for our state, and more importantly, they have a great love for canoeing as well. So it's glad to see Mr. Kelly representing us, and this fellow over here in the green suit is Lieutenant Governor Peter Pender. He has likewise been a fantastic representative of our backyard in the issue of the Ozark National Scenic Riverways. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and kick this off and just give them a nice round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeff. We really appreciate that, gentlemen. Feel free to step up before you want to be sure and recognize our Congressman, Missouri 8th Congressional District, Congressman Jason Smith, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. Senator Doug Labo's office also has a representative of yours. Thanks. And again.
Well, I'm Chris Kelly, and I'll tell you, thank you, Jeff. And I want to say thank you to an old colleague of mine from the Missouri House, Billy Pat Wright. Billy, where are you here? Thanks, Billy. Lots of people spend a lot of time saying how bad politicians are. But you guys sent up to the House a young man who's honest, who works hard, and has done his best to learn the intricacies of state government and to represent you as constituents well. And that's my friend Kelly. And I'm glad you're there, and I think you've done a real fine job. These young guys tease me all the time about being, older than most. But I say some of them ought to be on the daycare committee because they have such recent experience. One person who's not with us today, who is important to me in this whole discussion, is my grandson, Mr. Sam, the world champion grandson. And I will take him this summer on the river for the first time. Also with me today is my wife of 42 years, Nanette Miller. And I love the rivers, but I love her more. Another person who's not with us today is my old friend, cousin Danny Stevens. I walked over the bridge, and as I was walking over, I got a chance to stop and think about Danny. Peter and I both served with Danny. I went into the House, and Peter went into the Senate. And we call him Cousin Danny because that's what Donnie Kohler always called him. And we could have, I bet you folks, and those of us from the legislature could have our own Danny Stevens. And that could go on for a while. I'm telling you, we could all probably help. It is inadequate to say that I am grateful to be here today. And I cannot presume to speak for my friend the Lieutenant Governor on very many subjects. However, I am confident that we share a sense of profound gratitude that you would allow us to be here today. And why is that? That's because we're Americans. And what could be more true to the spirit of this republic than a debate, a Lincoln Douglas style debate on the steps of the county courthouse on a bright sunny Saturday morning. And the thing we are talking about is fundamental also to one of America's great values, the state parks, and that is the appropriate conflict between the spirit of enterprise and hard work that allow people to make a living in and around the river. And the other conflicting value very often is that of the resource itself. How do we appropriately protect that resource for not only for us, but for our children? The rivers are one of the river parks are one of America's beloved institutions, and some people say the parks, which were a fundamentally American idea, were America's best idea. The resolution before us today is should the federal government continue to manage this park, this resource, this waterway. And I'm going to speak in favor of that proposal. And Lieutenant Governor is going to argue that we should not.
Thank you.
There's a second issue here that overlies all this, and that is the regulation issue. How is it that we, the people, reasonably regulate that conflict between preservation and enterprise? I'm willing to bet that even the most ardent conservationists would agree that it's correct and fundamental to the purpose of the Ozark National Scenic Riverway to use, to enjoy, and to profit. I'm equally willing to wager that no reasonable person would contend that the preservation mandate should be abolished in favor of unrestrained exploitation. You know what? I'm going to take my ticket. I'm going to be terribly offended.
It's getting warm out here.
This is the most fundamental of the conflicts. Going back to this before the establishment of Yellowstone. How is it that we balance the preservation and the appropriate use of the park? They're both vital, and without each other, the system fails. Because without use, there's no purpose. And without preservation, there's no allure. My homework on this discussion, I read lots of stuff to get ready for this and to learn more technically about it, but two of the documents that I read that gave me a lot of insight were one, the statement of the National Parks Conservation Association, who argued very strongly for the preservation aspect of this. How do we protect the river? Preservation is the most important value. Use must step aside for preservation. And they did a good job. There's a lot of good arguments in that way, and they made the argument effective. The other side, the best argument that I read on the other side, was that of the Eminence Chamber of Commerce. They made a rational argument for appropriate use of the facility, both for visitors and for the people from the area. How is it that we can reasonably make a living using this resource? And they covered all the areas: access, recreation and preservation, campsite, stream bed, gravel camp. Those of you, must be some of you here who helped write that. And as you know, it was tremendously inclusive. Is it right or wrong to camp on the gravel beds with trucks? Equine use, big section about appropriate equine use. And law enforcement. And these are the key issues, aren't they? And these are the issues that the park system is currently evaluating. And they're evaluated with input from me, with input from you, with input from the legislature. The legislature enacted, and I voted for, a resolution which supports the current status, the no change status. Other people argue for the number B, or letter B, of the many options. But those are the two leading options. Let me tell you though, that both the conservation people and the Chamber of Commerce did get a little enthusiastic in their rhetoric sometimes. Both of these organizations were serious, informed, and sincere. And both of their goals are essential, because without each other, they both fail. Their ultimate interdependence is critical for rational use of this resource. You know, those management conflicts are really important, but they're the kind of things that reasonable people are going to work out if they work together. If you think there should be 40 miles of equine trails, and I think there should be 30 miles of equine trails, there's probably a reasonably good argument for 35 miles equine trails, isn't there? Because that's how we as Americans do it. Some things are absolute, but many things are subject to rational, cooperative working together. And that's what I hope we do with the Park Service as we move forth on the management plan. The management plan is important. They're soluble by people with goodwill. Far more important to our park, to our state, and to our nation is the survival of the National Riverway itself. The real question before us is whether the Ozark National Scenic Riverway should be decommissioned and turned over to the state of Missouri in some form. For the sake of our discussion here, let's set aside reality and assume that that's possible. Because, in fact, we all know that that's not going to occur. The state of Missouri won't do it, the federal government won't do it, and the people of Missouri. But it gives rise to extremely interesting questions that are worthy of serious discussion. This is not some backwater flow stream. 1.4 million people a year use this facility. This park is bigger than the Gauley River, bigger than the New River Gorge, it's bigger than Sequoia National Park, it's bigger than Mount Rainier. More people come here than come to Mount Rainier. That's a lot of use. They spend $55 million a year. And I agree with the Eminence Chamber of Commerce that the Riverway should be a flagship property of the National Park Service. It's a serious economic driver, as all of you know probably much better than me, for this part of Missouri. But if you think about the mission of the state parks, no state park can reasonably sustain the level of activity and interest that this park does. State parks are wonderful, but they're almost never major destination sites, are they? There are places where we Missourians use Missouri parks primarily, and on rare occasions we might go somewhere else. My wife and I have camped in state parks around the country. But generally speaking, they're not destinations. This is a destination for people around America and around the world. That will stop if it's a state park. It won't stop completely, but it will decline. Transfer will result in immediate and significant continuing decline in use of this resource. And that's not my analysis. That's economic analysis by the Department of Economic Development people and by the state park people themselves. They really know this stuff. The other question is, this park costs between $6.5 and $8, maybe $9 million some years to run. It's very big. The state park budget is already heavily used by all the wonderful parks that we've all been to. Merrimack, Elephant Rocks, Tomsaw, Katy Trail. The people who represent those parks aren't going to go to sleep, are they? If in my district there is a state park and you come in and say, oh, by the way, we need $6.5 million to take care of the brand new Ozark River state waterway, I'm going to say that's fine. Find your money somewhere other than the two parks in my district. And so would you if you represented that district, wouldn't you? That's the conflict that will occur. And it would be this park against all the other parks. There's no possible, I've been involved in state budgets for 18 years, and I've seen those conflicts, and those are appropriate conflicts. That's not going to change and shouldn't change. People in Elephant Rocks are going to fight for Elephant Rocks. We will not have the money to maintain this park at the level that it needs to be done. But there's a higher reason, and I think a more important reason, to support the continuation of the national system. I don't own this park any more than any of you do. We are all Americans, and we all own it together. There are some people that do have a greater interest in this park than I do, or in fact than you do. That is our grandchildren and those that are yet not born. My belief is that it is for them that we hold all of these national parks in trust. You would never consider the surrender of Yellowstone, or of Glacier, or of Gettysburg. I cherish the Ozark National Scenic Riverway as deeply as I do Gettysburg. This park brings to America a unique cultural and natural heritage that is found nowhere else and in this continent. And in fact, I think the concentration of Springs is found nowhere else on the planet. That's Missouri's contribution to our natural heritage. Ozark National Scenic Riverway is a national treasure, and it's the legacy that I want to give to my grandchildren and to yours. To lose it, I think, would be a failure, my failure as a grandparent, and my failure as an American. The national parks are America's best original idea. We have a duty to protect it, to use it, and to pass it on. I talked about Mr. Sam before. I'm going to bring him down here this summer. But I'll tell you something. I am not going to fail Mr. Sam. Something else. I have confidence that you will not fail my grandson. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the great honor of being here today. How about the first Saturday in May? In the Ozark? We can have the Derby. I'll be here. Dogwood, you good folks, and my good friend Chris Kelly. Thank you for that extended eloquence on behalf of a set of arguments and a position with which I respectfully disagree. I'm going to begin by quoting a founder of your party, Chris, as well as a founder of mine. First, your party. Where the people fear the government, there is tyranny. Where the government fears the people, there is liberty. Thomas Jefferson, a founder, a revered founder, not only of America, and the author of the Declaration of Independence, but also of your party. And now we get to the founder of my party, the first standard bearer, Abraham Lincoln, who said in a speech in Philadelphia as he approached Washington to be inaugurated in 1861, he spoke at Independence Hall and he said, "I have no thought about politics and government that did not originate and find its home in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, endowed by their Creator." Let's notice, not by a king, not an emperor, not by whatever government has a majority right now, by our Creator. That to secure these rights and to guarantee the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, the Declaration continues, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. From the consent of the governed. And that whenever any government becomes destructive of those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, substituting in its place such new forms as shall seem to them most likely to affect their safety and happiness. That's our original founding document, twinned with the Constitution, that is the first affirmation, eloquent affirmation of our liberty. And if you read all the way through it, and if you haven't done that since primary grades, go back and read it. You will find 24 paragraphs that follow that amount to a bill of indictment against King George on behalf of the American colonies. And about halfway down those 24 short paragraphs, most of them are just one sentence. You'll find one of my favorites. And that sentence says, "He," speaking of the king, "has sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance." Why do I quote the Declaration at length? Because these issues 238 years ago framed the issue that stands before us right now, today, here in Shannon County, the Ozark National Scenic Riverways. Stand up, sir, please. This gentleman was visiting with me a few minutes before we started. He said he grew up in Round Springs, and when the state managed that park, there were a couple of restaurants, there were all kinds of businesses thriving. Now there's nothing. After decades of federal management, those private business owners have been driven out. Swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out our substance. I think we're back there. We're back there. Now in the 21st century. back there indeed. Now, I've got to quickly cover 5 trends that are not specifically on the scenic riverways and do it very briefly to set in motion and to acquaint my worthy opponent and friend, Chris Kelly, with why the distrust exists of the federal government. Let's cover the last 5 years and start with Fast and Furious, a crackpot scheme by the United States Department of Justice to run guns into Mexico that ended up in the Mexican drug lords, and there ensued a slaughter of hundreds of innocent people, mostly Mexicans, and at least one American federal agent, Brian Terry, a DEA agent. There has been no accountability and no answers, and nothing but obfuscation and misleading testimony and flat-out lies. Then do you remember Obamacare? If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your health insurance plan, you'll keep your insurance plan. And to underscore the point, they said, period. Period. As if he ended the discussion. And oh, by the way, their plan will save us all $2,500. And nothing about $6,000 in higher deductibles. More lies. 5 years of lies on Obamacare. Benghazi, where 4 Americans, brave Americans, including an ambassador, died. And we still don't have the answer of where the president was that night. As tax-paid liars, paid by your tax money and mine, are sent out to mislead the American people. That one is coming undone. And then we get to the IRS, the most feared agency most Americans will ever deal with, that can rummage through the details of your financial life until they find something to charge you with, threaten you with, bankrupt you with. And they turn the IRS loose on law-abiding Americans who are doing nothing more than exercising their First Amendment rights to free speech and freedom of association to, in the words of the First Amendment, petition the government for a redress of grievances. This became, in their eyes, a crime to be punished by otherwise law-abiding Americans. And then we get to cap and trade, a plan, a crackpot scheme to double your energy prices at your home and your business here in Missouri and other states that are dependent on coal. And they couldn't pass it through the Congress when his party controlled everything and had 60 senators, a supermajority in the White House and a big majority in the House. Even they wouldn't pass it. But what was the response of the incumbent administration in Washington? We're going to do it through the EPA. We're going to do it by executive order. We're going to do the same thing that the elected representatives of the people would not pass through environmental regulation. Ruled by decree from the White House like a South American dictator. Lawless, the absence of law, arbitrary rule. Ruled by whim of who's ever in power, ignoring the law, flaunting the law, laughing at us. Folks, we're losing the country you and I grew up in. And I went through those 5 things as fast as I could to say why to my friend. The folks of Shannon County and the southern Missouri Ozarks do not trust the federal government that you are asking us. Now, attention is directed to several other things. I have no idea of my time, so you keep me honest, Captain, all the time. Attention is directed to whether the state can afford this or not. And it is said that state resources are strapped. There are several responses to that. Figure $6 million, you'd be interested to know, was in the House version of the budget for this specific purpose, for a management contract or management expenses for 1 year, $6 million. That bill and that appropriation containing that $6 million came out of the House Budget Committee on which Mr. Kelly sits. Would you be interested to know how he voted in committee? Yeah. He voted for that $6 million appropriation. It would seem to me that his vote belies his rhetoric spoken here just a few minutes ago today. His vote, when called upon to vote aye or nay, he voted aye. That, in fact, the resources are there in your state government for this purpose. Now, that was a committee vote. He's free to change his vote on the floor, and he did. when they voted in the full House of Representatives on that measure, he voted no on final passage of the bill. But at least in one of his votes, his own vote in black and white on the committee record shows that he believed in resources of national. If he felt differently then or now, perhaps he can explain when he comes back up. But I am alarmed about trends in our federal government. And I share your distrust. As an 8th generation Southeast Missourian, my folks came here from North Carolina to the Missouri Territory 214 years ago. We're not going anywhere. We're like you. We're not going anywhere, okay? And I take it to be a slander on the good people of Missouri. I'm moved by all the rhetoric about national parks, Yellowstone, Gettysburg, all the rest. But I take it to be a slander on the people of Missouri that we cannot be trusted with stewardship of these precious resources in state government. Now, there are several ways I think we can accomplish it. I think there are several ways you can accomplish it. One would be what Mr. Kelly says is probably to the point of never going to happen, and that is for the feds to deed back to us, Missourians, these lands, these riparian waters. Well, perhaps that is unlikely. Perhaps nobody here today will live to see that, but I'll tell you this. There are other means of accomplishing the same. Suppose we leave the land title in the federal government for purposes of title. But the state has a management contract. Our state parks that used to operate Round Spring, Alley Spring, and Big Spring could once again operate pursuant to a management contract. It would be closer to you, the people, and all the people of Missouri, the visitors here. Likewise, our Missouri Department of Conservation could assume management of the rest. I ran into the director of NBC Conservation in the halls of your capital on Wednesday, Bob Zebra. And I said, hey, Bob, guess what? After I tried to get a turkey on Friday, which didn't work out yesterday, by the way, I'm going down to Eminence, and we're debating this subject. So I said, what do you think about you guys assuming a management contract? And he said, we're already doing that for the federal government. I said, you are? He said, yes, we have management contracts on places like Truman Lake with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Of course we could enter into a management contract if our folks would be reasonable. I mean, our counterparts in the federal government would be reasonable. And that leads me to another point my friend Chris Kelly made that I think bears some discussion. In describing how things should be worked out, and the way things are typically worked out between neighbors and citizens here in Shannon County, he said 40 miles of equine trails versus 30 miles of somebody else's idea, so we compromise at 35. Well, you know what? That is the way those people work out. It is not the way a citizen feels in dealing with the distant federal government in Washington, D.C. It just doesn't work out that way. They are not reasonable. They do not listen. They are arrogant, they are overweening, and they are overreaching, and the time has come. The time has come, my fellow Missourians. All of us, get involved. It will not be enough for this generation of leaders, or the next, to merely try to slow the growth rate of federal spending. We need to reverse the growth rate of federal spending, and we need to make the federal government smaller, and we need to not stop there. This is the heart of my argument. It must be our project. If we're to be true to the founders, who would be shocked at what's going on in this country now. They'd be shocked that an instrumentality of the federal government put that many businesses out of business in Round Spring, Missouri, that were there 30, 40 years ago. They'd be appalled at the overreach. It must be our project, yours and mine, to devolve power away from the federal government back to the states, from the states back to cities, counties, and localities. and to devolve power from all three levels of government back to the people in this self-governing republic. And it is only through that, a commitment to that kind of vision and that kind of determination and that kind of tenacity that our liberties will be preserved, in my judgment. I am moved by my friend Mr. Kelly's rhetoric about our national parks. I revere them as does he. I have visited many of them out west, Gettysburg and many of the other battlefields, and I revere them every bit as much as he does. But it's not 1906 or 1910 when Teddy Roosevelt, in office, establishing our first national park. The government has grown vastly greater and vastly more terrifying to the citizens who are supposed to be in the saddle in this country. And we are besieged on all sides of our liberty. Now, Alexis de Tocqueville was the great French writer. He came to America in the 1830s and he wrote the most insightful stuff ever written on America, and it's interesting that it takes a foreigner to do that, but it does sometimes. And Tocqueville wrote about his fear. It's unbelievable to want to see it. We have to write 180 years ago or more. That he feared the rise of a democracy like ours, not of a hard dictatorship like communism or Nazism. Not a hard, nasty dictatorship like that. He feared what he called, Tocqueville wrote, the rise of soft despotism. A soft despotism. That is, a despotism that would act on your behalf, and be made to seem quite reasonable. It shall just turn over your power to the federal government. And that is where we are. And it took another great author and writer, C.S. Lewis, a great Christian apologist, to say this about de Tocqueville's point. Of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It may be better to live under robber barons than under the omnipresent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cruelty may at some point be satisfying. But those who torment us for our own good, will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. We are up against the federal moral busybodies who are certain that they know better than you and I how to run things. And that was also anticipated in a speech 50 years ago by a hero of mine. Speaking in a losing presidential campaign in the fall of 1964, this speaker stood before an audience in California and said these words that passed the test of time. One sentence. The issue in this election, he said, is whether we abandon the American Revolution and just confess that a tiny intellectual elite in a far distant capital back east can plan our lives better than we can plan them ourselves. The speaker was derided then and later as a washed-up B movie actor. His name is Ronald Reagan. And those words passed the test of time and they framed the issue for us here today. Even if you could do all the nice things that Mr. Kelly has in mind, the trust of the people out here is gone. And no person, no office holder who is listening to the people as I have tried to listen over the last 18 months and more on these issues blew away, and we successfully give yourselves a round of applause. That was a great episode in the restoration of American liberty. But we do not have much time to recover our liberty. And it's already been extinguished. The means of earning a living have been extinguished in Round Spring that existed there under state park. I say, let's get the state parks and the Department of Conservation, Missouri, both of which have national reputations, back here with management contracts. You can leave it titled in the federal government, and let's let the people have some input on how our resources are used.
He's over.
Let me make one correction. Roosevelt didn't do the first national park. Peter's hero and my hero, Abe Lincoln, founded the first national park. That was Gettysburg. I've been in politics for a long time, as has my friend Lieutenant. We all know how to shoot fish in a barrel. Every experienced politician in the United States, everywhere, knows how to do it. And what you just heard was shooting fish in a barrel. And here's why. You guys are very heavily conservative Republicans, aren't you? And it's fair to say, it's not a criticism, I think it's a wonderful thing, I think that's a rational thing to be, but Peter knows that. And so what he does is he figures out a series of little touch points, and he touches all those points so that you will then applaud and accept his principle. He didn't go to the management of the waterway at all. He didn't go to the problem of loss of use at all. He attempted to change your line of thinking about this project to what he thinks and he knows are hot point buttons, political hot point buttons. When you should understand by now that when that happens, you are being used. When a politician said so many things that you like, it's like having maple syrup poured in your ear.
We're not stupid.
It just isn't good discussion of the public issues. The question before us is the waterway. I, by the way, have been surprised since I've been down here at how many Shannon County people have talked to me and said, Chris, thanks for coming down. We agree with you. So I wouldn't be too sure that the whole population agrees that we should abolish the federal waterway. Swarms of officers that put a $6.5 million payroll into the neighborhood. Oh, let me talk about one of their manipulative tactics. Politicians love doing this. You have heard it many times in your life. I'm debating somebody. He votes this way on a particular thing in budget. I've been in budget for 16 years. I was chairman of the budget committee for a couple of years. It's true, I know the budget of the state of Missouri pretty well. I vote for the management plan on the theory that if we do it, we will need the money, and if we don't, the money won't get wasted. But that's not going forward over a long period of time, and the Lieutenant Governor knows that. He's had many votes of his over his career misrepresented. It's something that many of us do, none of us should do. It's real easy. It's more fish shooting in a barrel, and when you hear it, you should realize that that's what's going on. I think it's much more important and much more valuable to treat this debate as an educational process. What are the advantages and disadvantages? What do we have to do with the management plan to make a reasonable equine use of the river? What do we have to do to figure out what the appropriate response is to grab a bar camping? Those are the things that really are going to affect the economics and the resource. And those are the things that I hope people would understand. Okay, I bit on all that rhetoric. You know, I know all those Declaration of Independence things too, and I could manipulate as skillful as Peter could. It's inappropriate to do it. What we should talk about is this issue and these resources. How do we use them? How do people make a living? How do we preserve the resource? And how do we preserve the resource for my grandson and your grandchildren and the generations to come? Is it appropriate to devolve national parks? You can argue that it is, but it's big and important, and you should think serious about it because it's going to have a significant detrimental impact on the local economy. I am grateful to be here, not just for this resource, but for you. I grew up in a town about this size, had one blinking stoplight, and when I was a little kid, our parents used to say, there's going to be trouble if you're not home when that stoplight goes from solid red and green to blinking at 9:30 at night. So I get where we are today, and I appreciate it, but I also don't like to see you manipulated. Thanks for having me, and thanks to the party.
Well, I have manipulated you. How shameful.
I think we manipulated you.
How awful. Look. What I was doing, and Chris is trained as a lawyer, he knows what lawyers mean when they discuss what they call threshold issues. I was discussing threshold issues. We can get down into the details of management. What I'm talking about is where that management should reside and why a populace that willingly handed off management to the federal government 40, 50 years ago at a time of much greater trust in the federal government. I was talking about why that trust is gone with the wind and has not returned. It does not exist today. What do you think the vote would have been? What do you think the answer of the people of this part of the country would have been in the 60s when they started moving toward the National Scenic Riverways if they had said every business in Round Spring, Missouri will be out of business at this point in the future? Do you think the people would have acquiesced in handing off title to the federal government? I think I know the people of this area better, my neighbors in southern Missouri. And I will tell you this also. I was delighted when my friend Chris Kelly made reference to our mutual friend, the late Senator Danny Staples. I watched Danny Staples from the moment I arrived in the Missouri Senate, and I served a decade with him until he retired due to term limits. And we were friends from different parties. But Danny Staples was invincible and usually ran unopposed for re-election. And you had Democratic state representatives down here in those days. Why? Because they listened to the people. And Danny Staples would be on my side of this debate were he here today. I am firmly convinced. Because he helped us beat the National Streams Act in 1990, which was a left-wing power grab, dressed up in nice language. And he helped us beat, or I should say he would have helped us beat the Blue Way last year. The Democratic Party that ruled invincible in so much of Missouri all of those years is no longer the Democratic Party that we find in the saddle in the executive and legislative branches in Washington, D.C. There are still some sensible Missouri Democrats, and they're friends of mine. And the one with whom I'm differing here today is among them. But the people who occupy the National Park Service and the other reigning federal agencies, the EPA, which should stand now for Employment Prevention Agency, when they come into this part of the country and tell you you can't have a wood-burning stove, that's their next assault. It's well underway. It's well underway. And my friend says it's unfair to mention that because it's not discussing the details of management of the Scenic Riverways. And I say, it's ridiculous to ignore these other things because they are all of a piece. And if you go back to the language of the Declaration, Jefferson said, all of this evinces a design to reduce us under absolute despotism. That was his indictment against King George. And I am here to say we are at risk for the same thing. It may be a soft despotism, as de Tocqueville wrote in the 1830s, in Democracy in America. But it may also be the most oppressive, as C.S. Lewis said, the tyranny exercised by people who are doing it for your own good. That's what the feds tell you. They're doing it for your own good. Let them come to Round Spring and talk to this gentleman about the businesses that thrive there, the families who have businesses who can live. Let them listen to the county commissions out here, the Penn County Commission, which went on record not long ago, I believe 4 years ago, objecting to that year's, 2010's latest federal plan for a power grab, saying you're forcing us to close trail rides on which people, you know, this is one of the poorest counties and one of the poorest regions, not only in the state, but in America. There aren't that many ways to earn a living out here. After timber or tourism, there just aren't many. And the effect of the federal government is not consistent with the niceties and the nice rhetoric about our national park that my worthy opponent and my friend Chris Kelly would have you believe. They're not pouring syrup on anything, neither am I. I'm describing the brutal realities faced by Missourians trying to make a living. And our Department of Conservation, Missouri Department of Conservation, I've spoken with commissioners, and as I said a few minutes ago, with the director. But our Department of Conservation and our State Park Service have national reputation, second to none. We have a passionate tradition of love for conservation and good sound conservation practices in Missouri. And let no one say any different. So we could do a management contract that would be reasonable. I repeat, the State Parks Department could take back Round Spring, Alley Spring, and Big Spring as they did before 50 years ago and manage them just fine. And there might be some businesses and some families allowed to earn a living. And some young people who, instead of having to leave to find employment and raise a family, could come back here and stay here. That's my vision. That's my vision for you. You know, I said earlier the hour's late, and I believe it is late. We can change things every 2 years by elections, every 4 years by an election in the White House. These people do not respect our liberty. The 5 examples I cited, he says, pulling on your hot buttons, it's necessary to describe them, to describe the context in which we're living. We do not live in a time of great trust of the federal government. I didn't even talk about the invasions of privacy, which is another reason that Americans' trust in the federal government is being eroded. It is an entirely reasonable response of citizens in this part of the country to oppose federal control of the National Scenic Riverway. It is eminently reasonable. And it is eminently reasonable to say, as I do here tonight, as I conclude, that it is time for Missouri to take back these resources in some form. I say fine, leave it titled in the feds, but have the conservation, have a management contract, most of the riparian land along the river, and have the State Parks Department manage those 3 state parks, and you will begin to see a flourishing in your economy here that has been missing as the dead hand of the federal government has become heavier, and as the boot on the neck of Missourians has gotten worse by the federal government in this part of the state. I thank you for listening to both of us and for coming out today, and have a great Eminence Days Festival. We've been under an hour. How about that?
Ladies and gentlemen, one more time. I know it's chiseled in the state Senate. It says free and fair discussion